In the early 20th century, Düsseldorf, Germany, and the surrounding areas were under attack by a killer. From murdering children to drinking blood, this man was a sexual pervert and serial killer whose victim list was at least 24 deep. Sadistic and cruel, he strangled, beat, and stabbed men, women, and children, not for the thrill of the murder, but for the sexual thrill of seeing their blood flow. He was a thief, an arsonist, a rapist, a murderer, and a cannibal. This is Peter Kürten, the Vampire of Düsseldorf. Hey y'all, I'm Chris Calvert.
And I'm her husband, Rob Pottorff. Welcome to Hitched to Homicide.
For better or worse.
Till death do us part.
Welcome back, everybody.
Yes, welcome. And because this particular episode takes place in Germany, willkommen. I know I've already done that one before, but that's for our German friends.
You did. Yeah. You have done it before, but it is appropriate.
It is very appropriate.
I know. We're going to Düsseldorf, Germany.
Okay. Achtung.
Düsseldorf. We are back from vacation. I just quickly want to tell everybody we're back from vacation. Rob's a little under the weather today, but he's being a trooper. I got sick on vacation. We come home from vacation. I gave it to him on vacation. Now he's got a little bit of a virus, you know. Yeah. You got to share the love.
I did a COVID test though, so it's not COVID.
Not COVID.
Yeah, so we're good.
Just the creeping crud.
Yeah.
But he's being a real trooper by being here today.
Because I love doing it.
Thank you, sweetheart.
You're welcome.
Well, I'm going to get started on this one. It's a little bit long. I honestly could have made this 2 or maybe 3 parts if I talked about absolutely every person that Peter Kürten attacked. But I'm hitting the high spots. Before I get started, I want to thank some sources. allthat'sinteresting.com, Murderpedia, biography.com, the big book of serial killers, and The Sadist by Dr. Carl Berg, copyright 1932. I did read it, and if you're up for 177 pages of psychology and sick and twisted interviews with this killer, I highly recommend it. Most of my information for this podcast actually comes from this book because after he's caught, he confesses to everything and he goes into great detail. He's got photographic memory.
Wow. Well, let's do it.
Peter Kürten is born on May 26, 1883, to parents Peter and Sibylla. So he's a junior.
I like that name.
Sibylla.
Yeah.
Peter's the oldest of 13 children. They live outside of Cologne, Germany, in a suburb called Köln-Mulheim, which actually translates to Cologne City, which means it's a suburb outside of the city.
And it smells really good.
The Germans are very literal, and it smells good. Cologne. Yeah, exactly.
Sorry.
Very good.
Okay.
For reference, Cologne, Germany was founded in 39 BC.
Oh, wow.
When the Germanic tribe of the Ubi entered into an agreement with the forces of the Roman General Marcus Vipsanius Agrippa.
That's easy for you to say.
Bless you.
Yeah.
And settled on the left bank of the Rhine. And Düsseldorf is said to have emerged in the 7th or 8th centuries from the tiny farming and fishing villages that grew up around the meeting place of the Rhine River and the Düssel River. And indeed, the name is derived from the name of its river, and Dorf, which means village.
Well, what's interesting, Dorf, that ending of that name, that's kind of a popular, I don't know what you would call it, because my heritage name is Bottdorf.
Yes.
Yeah, D-O-R-F.
Which means we come from the Bott village.
Yeah, a lot of bats. Whatever.
But this is the end of my German geography lesson and history lesson for the day.
All right.
But I did want to give you just a little background on where we were. Peter's father was a sand molder or a sand caster. He would make the molds that the liquid metal was poured into. He was also an abusive drunk, coming home from the local inn, beating his wife and children every night. And since Peter was the oldest, he took the brunt of the beatings. But that's not all he did. Peter's father would gather all the children into the one-room apartment where they lived.
Yeah.
13 kids,
Good
a one-room
Lord.
apartment.
Wow.
The dad would gather them all together to watch him rape their mother.
What?
Yes.
Oh, my God. No wonder this guy's so screwed up.
But that's still not all, because in 1894, Peter Sr. is sent to prison for 15 months for having sex with his oldest daughter.
Oh, jeez.
She was 13 at the time, and at this point, Peter's mother leaves his father. She will eventually remarry and die in 1927. So the family is poor. Both of his parents are abusive alcoholics, and his father is a sick, twisted person. Right out of the gate, this has disaster written all over it.
Right.
By the age of 5, and according to Peter himself, he attempted to murder one of his playmates by trying to drown him. When he was 9, he befriended the local dog catcher who lived in his building, and this man taught Peter, among other things, how to masturbate and how to torture dogs.
Wow.
An interesting combination.
Well, everybody's got to have a hobby, right?
Yeah, and by
Sorry, that was really wrong.
But by 9 years old, he's got this strange man showing him how to polish the rifle and torment animals.
Oh, man.
Around the same time, age 9, Peter actually killed a young boy by pushing him off a log raft, knowing that his friend could not swim.
Wow.
And another time, he threw a different boy from the edge of a log raft into the Rhine. This boy was carried away on the tide, and he too drowned. The deaths were both ruled accidental and would stay that way until years later, when Peter wants to take credit for them.
Wow.
Meanwhile, his father is ruthlessly beating him on a regular basis, and because of this, Peter would regularly run away from home. And while he's out on the streets, he learns how to steal. At 13, he has a relationship with a young girl, and although she let him fondle her, she refused to have sexual intercourse with him. I mean, they're 13 years old. Yeah.
Wow.
Peter began engaging in bestiality with the dogs he was capturing and torturing.
Whoa.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yes.
That's dark.
So from 9 to 13, he's quickly escalated.
Yeah. But that escalated quickly.
That escalated quickly. But after dogs, he moved on to goats, sheep, and pigs to relieve his urges.
It's equal opportunity bestiality.
It is. And he wasn't just into this kinky furry alone. He would get the greatest sexual satisfaction by stabbing the animal just before he achieved orgasm.
Wow.
He only stopped this because a farmer caught him having sex with one of his pigs while stabbing it. And then I wrote in the margin, Germany, where the men are men and the goats, sheep, and pigs are scared.
Exactly.
But it's like a horror movie.
Yeah.
Right?
Wow.
Around this same time, he tries to rape his oldest sister, the same one his father had sexually molested. He leaves school by 1897, and at the age of 15, he's apprenticing as a sand molder, just like his old man. I mean, he hates his dad. But yet he's sort of falling into these sexual deviant ways, and he's even chosen his profession.
Yeah, like father, like son.
Yeah. Apple doesn't fall too far from the tree.
Exactly.
How many of those can we do? But this is going to last for 2 years. Then he robs his employer, took all the money that he could out of his own home, and he runs away. Just a month later, he will be caught and charged with theft and breaking and entering, and he will spend a month in prison. And after his release, he'll go back to his old ways of committing petty crime before beginning to act on his sexual and pyromaniacal urges on a regular basis.
So now he's into setting fires?
Yes,
Wow.
He likes to start fires too.
He's like covering his bases.
Oh, you have no idea. Just wait. November 1899, Peter is a charming, handsome, and dapper young man, and he didn't have trouble attracting young women. And when Peter is 16, he meets an 18-year-old girl. They have sex, and he strangles her to death with his bare hands.
Wow.
There was never a report of this murder, and Peter is later going to say that maybe he didn't, quote, throttle her as well as he thought he had, and perhaps she survived, but never said a word to anybody about what happened.
Wow. And how old was he at this time?
16.
Good grief.
Peter also calls it throttling and not strangling. And of course, it is a proper term for strangulation, just not one that Americans use very often,
Right.
because the connotation of throttling to us is like giving it some gas, like
Yeah.
an engine, right?
Exactly.
Yeah. June 1913, Peter picks up a girl. Her name is Margaret Schaefer. On the way home, he strangles her several times, taking her to the point of passing out. And when she tells him to stop and that she's scared, Peter says, quote, "That's what love's like. I won't kill you, though," end quote. And after that, these two sort of have a relationship, and she puts up with him strangling her during sex.
Wow.
According to Margaret, quote, "We walked in the woods the whole night. Peter would not let me go home. He had my bag with the keys in it. He wanted to kiss me and then knock me about, afterwards becoming friendly again. Then he threw me onto a bench and tried to have sexual intercourse with me. In the struggle, my dress got torn and I cried, and then he became kinder again. I looked simply awful, and then in that state could not have taken the tram. So we sat on the bench, and Peter threw his coat about both of us, and we fell asleep. Dawn came and I woke him up, and he started again as before, tore off my earrings, bit me, half strangled me, pulling my hair out in the handfuls. He looked like the very devil himself. I begged him to calm down, for otherwise he would end up in hell. And my words had some effect, and he did calm down. He made me swear that I would not tell anything to anybody we might meet," end quote.
Wow.
Now, these two eventually end up in a pub for breakfast, and she goes to the waiters who are in another room and says, "Hey, dudes, this is what's happening." I believe her quote was, "I told them of the jam I was in," end quote.
That's an understatement.
Yeah, but Margaret did put up with his behavior for a while. Now, Peter's first confirmed murder takes place on May 25th, 1913. Peter is robbing a tavern, and he comes across 9-year-old Christine Klein. She's asleep. Her parents own the tavern that Peter is robbing, and while they're downstairs working, Peter is upstairs where he finds little Christine. And according to Peter, quote, "It was my specialty to frequent at such times houses where the ground floors were utilized as business premises. In particular, inns or the proprietor and his family lived above," end quote. So he would pick a place where he knew that everybody would be busy downstairs and he could rob upstairs.
Gotcha.
He breaks into the house owned by the Kleins. He goes up to the first floor. It's about 10 or 11 o'clock. He starts opening all the doors, but he finds nothing worth stealing. And then in a room facing the stairs, there was a bed in the left corner near the window, and that's exactly where he entered. It was this great big bed where adults could sleep. And as the light came through the window from the street, Peter could see clearly everything in the room, including a sleeping girl who was about 10 years old, covered with a thick feather bed.
Wow.
She was lying with her head towards the window. Peter seized her by the neck with his hands and strangled her for 1 or 2 minutes. Quote, "The child woke up, struggled to free herself, scratched my hand, and then became unconscious and still. Her arms were thrown above her head, and I drew her head over the ledge of the bed and threw the feather bed to the foot of it. And with 1 or 2 fingers, I penetrated the genitals. With a small but sharp pocket knife, I made a deep cut in the throat of the child. I started on the left side of the throat, drawing the knife to the right with the right hand. I heard the blood gurgle up and drip on the mat. It spattered on my hand. The whole business did not take more than 3 minutes. Then I left the room and made off," end quote.
God, this is a monster.
Now, what he's not saying in this particular paragraph, in this particular statement is He's slitting her throat. He hears the blood spilling onto the mat below the bed, and he spontaneously climaxes in his pants.
Wow.
And he ejaculates, and I can only say ejaculate so many times in a day, and I had to come up with other ways to say it,
right.
So hang on.
Yeah, okay.
That will be the entertainment portion of the podcast. I might teach you something new. I was deep into Urban Dictionary.
I'm ready. Bring it on.
Yeah. The day after he murders little Christine, he goes to the tavern across the street because he wants to hear what people are saying about the murder. And this is a huge high for him. And he delighted in hearing the horror and the voices and the reactions of the people as they discussed the murder. And he will return to Christine's grave occasionally after her murder. And when he does, he touches the soil where she's buried and spontaneously climaxes again when he's just got his hands in the dirt.
Wow.
Of her grave.
Wow.
So is he reliving this all in his head?
Who knows?
I mean, I wrote in the margin, and you might take this out in post, but is this the first spank bank? I mean, he's storing these memories in his head in order to bring them back up again for sexual gratification.
Yeah.
After Christine is found, suspicion falls on her uncle. His name is Otto, who had argued with her father the night before and threatened to, quote, do something he would remember all his life, end quote, after Christine's father refused to loan Otto money. So there was an argument, and Uncle Otto kind of made a threat. And after the daughter is found dead, they're like, Otto did it. And Uncle Otto was charged with the murder.
Wow, really?
Yes, but fortunately he was acquitted by a jury, which decided there was insufficient evidence.
Wow.
2 months later, Peter's burglarizing a home when he murders Gertrude Frank, age 17. He strangled her with his bare hands, and as the blood comes out of her mouth, he spontaneously launches the paratroopers in his pants.
I like these.
In 1914, Peter is drafted into the Kaiser's army. I mean, World War I is starting to gear up, right?
Right.
He soon deserts. He just one day walks away from his barracks. Just walks away.
Yeah, you can't do that.
Yeah. Then he began burning down buildings, committing arson. He would set them on fire, then go a little ways away. He liked watching from a distance as the emergency teams would show up on the scene. And while he watches, he gets sexually aroused, thinking about who might be hurt in the fire, who might be suffering.
Wow, this guy's just twisted.
Oh, yeah. And he plans these large-scale disasters, like sabotaging a railway system to kill as many people as possible in fire and destruction. And while he's fantasizing about this, he climaxes again. He is eventually arrested for arson, and after they pick him up, they realize, oh, this guy's supposed to be serving Germany right now. He's a military deserter.
Right.
And he's tried and convicted by the military system in Germany. Now, while he's in prison, Peter has said that he was punished severely and developed these deranged erotic fantasies, which caused him to spontaneously ejaculate while thinking of them. So he's deranged to begin with. He's sexually deviant. He's locked away in prison, whereby the way he acts out, he does so he can be in solitary confinement with his own thoughts. And his thoughts are so deranged, these deranged sexual fantasies, whereby he's able to spontaneously ejaculate from the thoughts in his head. And he's later going to call this, quote, cell madness, end quote. It's madness for sure.
Yeah. Once again, that's an understatement.
I mean, it's some sort of Harry Potter magical dick sorcery he's got going on because... I would have to say that's impressive that, just using his own sick, twisted mind. Yeah. Yeah. He's crying in his pants all the time.
Wow.
And while he's there in prison, Peter cavorts with the known sexual predators in jail and gives them advice. What?
The inmates are running the asylum.
What?
Yeah.
Really? What? I mean, yeah. So finally, he's released in April of 1921. He's been to prison 4 times in his life, but never for murder. And Peter's a man now, and in personal appearance, Peter Kürten was well-built, clean-shaven, he had a fresh complexion, and in all his personal habits, he was meticulous. And this narcissistic tendency truly reflected the self-satisfaction of the inner man because Peter dearly loved himself. He was unable to love any other human being. He was only in love with himself.
So on a scale of 1 to 10, as far as narcissism,
he's probably a 45.
Yeah, I was going to say like a 72.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's at this point that Peter meets Augusta Scharf, a shop owner and former prostitute. Peter has moved to Altenburg, and he's living with his sister for just a little bit. And it's through his sister that he meets a slightly older Augusta.
Okay.
Now, these two are a match made in heaven because Augusta shot and killed her former fiancé. She shot him and served 4 years in prison because he would not commit.
Oh, gee. Wow. Are we getting married or not? No?
I believe that she shot him 4 times.
Wow.
And she served 4 years.
Wow.
Augusta and Peter get married after knowing each other for 2 years. And Peter would only have sex with her if she initiated it. And he would fantasize about violence and killing the entire time they were together.
Jeez.
So this is an oversexed man, right?
Yeah.
Who has the Harry Potter wizardry in his pants.
Right.
And he doesn't want to have sex with his wife.
Yeah.
That's not his thing. That's not what turns him on.
Wow.
Yeah.
I don't even have a comment for that.
Peter and his wife moved back to Düsseldorf in 1925. Now, Augusta, who has a history of killing her men, is very unhappy when she discovers that Peter is sleeping with not one, but 2 other women, a servant girl and a housemaid. Augusta tells one of them to press charges and claim that Peter raped her, and she does, and the charge is upheld in court, and Peter is sentenced to prison for a 5th time. This time for 8 months, he will only serve 6. So he doesn't want to sleep with Augusta,
right?
But apparently he's sleeping with these 2 servant girls.
It almost sounds like he wants to have this sexual stuff that's going on that he shouldn't be doing. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, if it's forbidden, then it's sexy or it turns him on.
Yeah. Like, with the animals and then with prostitutes and with, housekeepers.
And maybe they let him strangle them, too.
Yeah.
Or, quote, throttle them, as he says.
Who knows?
Now, while he's married to Augusta, he was also employed in a factory as a molder and became an active trade unionist. After these 2 moved to Düsseldorf and after he's out of jail, Peter starts to find his self-control eroding. Peter is ready to kill again.
Oh, he's starting to feel it eroding?
His self-control is eroding, honey.
Okay.
Yeah.
Once again, whatever.
February 3rd, 1929, Peter goes looking for a victim, and he's got a pair of scissors in his pocket. Peter stalks an elderly woman. Her name is Apollonia Kuhn. So he's not necessarily looking for a beautiful woman or a child because he actually, you're going to find out, he attacks men, women, children. Wow. He's a non-denominational, that's not what I'm looking for. That's not the word.
Once again, he's an equal opportunity murderer.
He's an equal opportunity killer. Yeah.
He doesn't discriminate.
So he grabs Apollonia and says, quote, "No row, don't scream," end quote. No row meaning don't cause a scene. And he dragged her into nearby bushes and stabbed her with a pair of scissors 24 times.
Wow.
Several of the wounds went so deep they entered her bones. But get this, these German women are made of hardy stock. She survives.
Oh, wow.
Apollonia
24 times?
24 times, and she survives. And Apollonia will tell the police that Peter stabbed her rapidly. And then, according to Peter, quote, "I had gone to Gerresheim, which is a suburb of Düsseldorf, to look for work. A woman was walking in front of me. It was dark. I gripped her on the breast and stabbed the woman first in the head. Then I went on stabbing. Blood came immediately after the first stab. She fell down. I stabbed into her heart. She shouted for help. I ran away. I couldn't help it." But while he's stabbing Apollonia, he has an orgasm, despite the fact that it, quote, "was bitterly cold outside." And the entire attack took seconds.
Jeez.
And I thought it was interesting that in retrospect, he mentions that it's bitterly cold outside, which made me think of a Seinfeld episode. It's like a frightened turtle, but not Peter.
Yeah.
Neither rain, nor snow, nor sleet, nor hail shall keep him from achieving,
Yeah.
Yeah. He's
Wow.
he's going to murder.
Yep.
5 days later, on February 8th, quote, I left home at about 6 o'clock at night. I went towards St. Vincent's Church where I met a girl between the ages of 8 and 10. I asked her where she wanted to go. She said home. I asked, where do you live? She tells him. I said, then come with me. I'll take you home. I take her by the hand and lead her along the street. Then I seized the child's throat, strangled her, and put her on her back. With my right hand, I drew the scissors out and stabbed the child in the left temple and in different places about the heart. The child seemed to be dead. I went back to my flat and searched myself for bloodstains. I also cleaned the scissors. There was no bloodstain on my clothing. Then I went to the movies as I still had a free ticket and then home again, end quote.
Wow. Okay.
So he strangles Rosa Olinger, she's 9, until she's unconscious. Then he stabbed her with this pair of scissors in the temple. He stabbed her in the genitals, the heart, and stomach. And as he plunged the knife into her body, he ejaculates, which he then in turn inserts his semen into her vagina with his fingers.
Jeez.
And he left her body beneath a hedge. And several hours later, he goes back and sets her on fire. And when he sees the flames, he starts crying in his pants all over again.
Oh, my gosh.
Her body was discovered the following day by workmen. Now, even though her death occurred very quickly because of the heart wounds, there were no visible marks where he had strangled her. But they knew that some kind of strangulation had started the attack, even though there weren't traces of it on her skin. And nobody heard a call for help, and nobody heard anything when the crime was being committed. And they're in a really busy neighborhood when this is happening.
Okay.
A few days later, on February 13th, Peter murders Rudolph Scheer, a 45-year-old man. So it goes from a 9-year-old girl that he sexually violates to a 45-year-old man, okay? Rudolph had just left a beer house that night. He's a little drunk. He's attacked between 11 p.m. and midnight. But his body won't be found until the next morning. Peter had stabbed him in the head, eyes, and back 20 times.
Gee.
A day later, he returned to the scene of his murder to relive the moment, and he even spoke with detectives while he's there about the murder.
Guy's got some balls.
Magical balls.
Yeah. And he's up for any occasion.
He is. Now, this is Peter's account of the event. Quote, I ran into a man. He seemed to be drunk and noisy. He shoved me. What do you want? He asked. I looked at his hands to see whether he was armed. Then with the flat of my hand, I struck him in the neck. He went over backwards and fell flat on his face. I took the scissors and gave him a heavy stab with them. He grabbed my legs and half lying, half kneeling in front of me, clung to me. I stabbed him in the right temple and again in the neck. Even in the dark, I could see a large pool of blood. The whole thing didn't take more than 8 minutes. One of which I spent standing over him before I dragged him to the ditch. The next day at 8 o'clock, I returned to the scene of the crime. On my way back, I met a detective, and the detective looked at me suspiciously. How did I come to know of this crime? He inquired, and I told him I'd heard of it by telephone. End quote.
So that was the equivalent of Twitter back then.
The telephone. Yeah. But he shows up at the scene and he knows more about what's going on there than the cops. It doesn't say anything about him dropping the paratroopers off in his pants while he's talking to the detective. So I don't know if that happened. He's pretty open about all of that. So makes me think that didn't happen. Between March and July of 1929, Peter attempted to strangle 4 more women and claimed that he threw one of them into the river. On August 21st, 1929, 3 women were stabbed on their way home one evening, but there were no more murders. All of those people survived, by the way, okay?
Okay.
But there were no more murders.
Which is, and I got to interrupt just for a second, which is amazing with the amount of times that he's stabbed these people.
Yeah, and the first woman who survived said he stabs rapidly. It's boom, 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 boom.
So maybe he's not going in very deep.
Well, no.
But still...
There are actually some autopsy pictures, and I will post them in the In-Laws and Outlaws.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Wow. Okay.
Which I didn't tell anybody to join the In-Laws and Outlaws at the beginning of the podcast. I'm just realizing, go join. You'll be able to see the autopsy pictures.
Yeah.
But he's pretty quiet. He tries between March and August of 1929 to murder these people, but he stabs people, but he hasn't killed anybody until August 11th. Maria Hahn had agreed to go on a date with Peter. Now, he's a married man, remember, okay?
Right.
Sometime during the night, after they visit a beer garden, he buys her chocolate. These two have dinner, and then they have sex along the river. Go out for a little chicken, maybe have some sex. But then Peter led Maria to a field because he's decided, somewhere between the chocolate and the sex, that he's going to kill her. Quote, I led Maria to a big bush near a ditch, and there we settled down. It was 9:30. Suddenly, I strangled her until she became unconscious, but she came to herself again quickly, and again I strangled her. After a bit, I stabbed her in the throat with the scissors. She lost a lot of blood, but regained consciousness, repeatedly asking me in a feeble voice to spare her life.
Wow.
I stabbed her in the breast, a blow that probably pierced the heart. I then gave her repeated stabs in the breast and head. The process of dying probably took an hour. I let the body roll into the ditch and threw branches over it, end quote.
Wow.
Now, while he's stabbing her and the blood is flowing, Peter does admit that he's got fireworks going off in his pants or out of his pants, because who knows? I mean, I also wrote in here, who is doing this man's laundry?
Yeah, exactly.
I mean...
He must be taking this stuff down to the Rhine and beating him on a rock. Sorry.
Yeah. But Maria pleaded with him repeatedly and begged for her life. And Peter raped and strangled Maria, and then he stabbed her to death. And from start to finish, it takes an hour. So he's dragging this one out. And then he buries her body in a cornfield. And when Peter gets home, his wife is already in bed. But the next morning, they have a fight because she's suspicious about the night before. Maybe because he's been crying in his pants.
Yeah.
I don't know. Peter makes up his mind that he would have to find a way to make sure that the body of Maria Hahn wasn't discovered. Otherwise, he thinks his wife will connect the dots. She'll connect the bloodstains on his clothes and the semen in his pants to this girl's murder.
Hey, I hate to tell him, but I think that's probably the least of your worries.
Yeah, his laundry is the least of his worries.
Yeah, well, no, and his wife finding out.
Oh, his wife finding out. Yeah. Well, she's been sticking by him through thick and thin. And I did read that because she killed her fiancé, she felt pretty terrible about that. She felt awful bad about it.
Right.
And I think she thought that living out her life or being married to Peter was kind of her punishment. That even though she was out of prison, that the universe or God was still going to punish her, and her punishment was Peter. I don't know that anybody deserves Peter.
Yeah, no, that's severe punishment.
Yeah. But after he kills Maria, several weeks later, he comes back to where he's buried her in this cornfield, and he's got this plan. He wants to nail her body to a tree because he wants to disgust the public. He wants them to all gather around and just be clutching their pearls. And because he's going to get his rocks off on that. So he digs her up, but her body was too heavy for him. So he caresses her remains, he embraces them, he gets sexually aroused, lets off the fireworks, and then buried her again.
Jeez.
The newspapers cover these murders with these sensational headlines, and when one of the investigators tells a reporter that they believe the killer might be drinking the blood of his victims, Peter is immortalized as the Vampire of Düsseldorf.
There it is.
And in fact, Peter will tell Dr. Carl Berg, a psychologist who will study him later, that he was actually drinking some of the blood from their wounds.
Oh, wow.
But here's the problem. People are also being murdered by a man named Strasberg.
Okay.
16-year-old Erna Penning on April 2nd, 1929. Frau Flake, they didn't use her first name. Strasberg, who was a learning disabled man, is picked up for some other crime, and he admits that he is the killer. He admits that he's the Vampire of Düsseldorf. He's not.
Right.
Now, he did murder 2 women. Maybe he murdered 3.
Right.
But when they pick him up for something that's completely unrelated, he just starts talking and says, yeah, it's me, and I'm the Vampire of Düsseldorf. And so then the authorities after they commit him to an asylum, the police are like,
we got it. We're done.
Case closed.
Moving
murder
on.
solved.
Moving on.
Yeah.
Nothing to see here.
Not so fast. 3 months after Peter murders Maria Hahn, he sends an anonymous letter to the police confessing to the murder and giving instructions on how to find her remains in the cornfield. So nobody's going to steal his limelight.
Right.
Not you, Mr. Strasberg,
Right.
because I'm the vampire of Düsseldorf. And to prove it, I've killed this woman. Here's her body. Here's a map.
I put a lot of work into this, so you're not going to steal my thunder.
Yeah. Then Peter went on a spree of violence beginning on August 21st. He attacked 3 people, stabbing an 18-year-old girl, a 37-year-old woman, and a 30-year-old man. All were seriously injured, but they all survived. Then on August 24th, at the Festival of the Flea in Germany, Peter is on the lookout for a new victim. He's at the fairgrounds, and Peter notices 2 young foster sisters walking home. He approaches them, and he sends the oldest girl, Louise Lenzen, she's 14, he sends her on an errand to buy him cigarettes with the promise of more money when she comes back. Here's some money, buy me some cigarettes, and when you get back with my cigarettes, I'll give you more money. Then he picked up the other little girl that is with her, 5-year-old Gertrude Hamacher. He picks her up off the ground by her neck, puts her over his arm, and carries her across a field to another smaller field. He puts her down. He strangled her until she was unconscious and then cut her throat from left to right. The sound of the blood when he cuts her throat makes him climax again.
Jeez.
Then he cleans off his dagger, puts it back into its sheath and into his hip pocket. When Louise returns with his cigarettes, he grabs her by the throat and strangles her. She slumps down as he drops her in a bean patch in a nearby garden. She wakes up, moves, and begins to scream, and her resistance excited him so much. Peter stabbed her in the aorta, and he bit her throat, sucking blood from the wounds. He climaxes again, but this time without an erection. He drinks so much of her blood that he then pukes.
Yeah, I don't even know what to say about any of this. I mean,
I know.
This is beyond twisted. I mean, this guy is
there are a lot of people who say he's the worst serial killer ever.
Yeah, I would
because
agree.
he's just so sexually deviant.
Yeah.
And because of what it is that turns him on. I mean, there are a lot of people who would say that Jeffrey Dahmer, there are a few bad ones, but Peter is definitely the first one.
Yeah.
By the way, I read that he loved reading about Jack the Ripper.
Oh, really?
Uh-huh. Yeah. He loved reading about Jack the Ripper. But after he kills these 2 girls and, Mr. Belvedere's in his pants twice, the second time, flaccid apparently, and he drinks blood and he pukes, he leaves the fairgrounds, and at 11:30 he's home, and his wife is still awake. She wants to have a chat with him. So they have a little chit-chat, and Peter said that he had no bloodstains on him, and his hands were clean because he found a rag on his way home and wiped the dagger, and his hands clean. But how in the world did he keep that much blood off of him?
Yeah, I was about ready to ask. How do you, he's like sucking blood out of her neck?
Yeah, and he threw up blood too.
Yeah. Wow.
So I wrote in my script, there's a lie in there somewhere. That's Peter's account of what happened. So there's a lie in there somewhere.
Yeah.
Yeah. The next day he goes back and he sees the excitement of all the people surrounding the discovery of the 2 girls' dead bodies. He gets his rocks off all over again. And on the same day, Gertrude Schulte, age 27, refused to have sex with him. So he meets this girl, Gertrude Schulte. He's all let me back up. He's all excited because he's killed these 2 little girls the night before.
Right.
He goes back and sees that everybody is very upset. He gets his rocks off one more time. And then he goes and he actually picks up Gertrude Schulte, age 27. She refused to have sex with him. He stabbed her repeatedly in the head, back, shoulder, and neck, but Gertrude survived. She described him to the police as a, quote, pleasant-looking man around 40 years old, end quote. Now, by the time he's 40, I'm just going to say it, he looks like Hitler.
Wow.
He's got the Hitler haircut.
Really?
He's got the little Hitler
mustache.
What is that called? What is that called?
Hitler mustache.
Yeah, he's got the little Hitler mustache. I will post pictures of him in the In-Laws and Outlaws. Yeah, but she thought he was pleasant looking.
It's appropriate that he did that. I mean, talk about pure evil.
Yeah. Here's what he had to say about Gertrude. Quote, Just about the time my obsession was rather strong upon me, feeling fairly sure that I would be successful in finding a victim on that day, I pocketed my dagger. I met a young girl. As we went along, we repeatedly embraced and kissed each other. We sat near the Rhine and I caressed her, but she refused me sexual intercourse. I knelt beside her, caressed with my left hand her hair, then seized my dagger with my right hand and attempted to cut her throat. She shouted loudly and struggled hard. Then blindly, I went on stabbing her. During the cutting and the stabbing, he has, you guessed it, an orgasm.
Yep.
Gertrude shouts to attract attention, and some people were calling out, "What's the matter?" And Peter yeets on out of there.
He's gone.
He's gone, but then he stands near a ditch and waits and watches. He waits for the police to arrive. He waits because he wants to see how long it takes for them to get there. It's 20 minutes. And Peter's in the bushes, hiding and praying that Gertrude is going to die from her stab wounds. By the way, he broke his knife on this last stab.
Wow.
On this last stabbing. He breaks his knife.
That's some violent stabbing.
That's not all he's going to break. So just hang on. But I thought this was interesting because police will say, and profilers will say, that serial killers or killers like to come back to the scene. They stand in the crowd and watch, the investigation happen. They'll stand behind the police tape.
Right.
The son of Sam, I believe, was notorious for doing that stuff.
It's sort of like, Milton in the movie Office Space. When he sets the place on fire and then the next day or that afternoon he comes back and he's in the crowd. So
yeah, don't mess with a man's red stapler.
Yeah, exactly.
If you know that movie, you know what I'm talking about.
One of my favorites.
Yeah. But Peter checks his clothing for bloodstains, and then he quietly walks home. And Gertrude lives to give her side of the story to police, where she says there was, quote, no talk of kissing until after we had settled down. Then he tried to pull off my knickers and threw me backwards. This tussle did not last more than 2 minutes. He suddenly released me, held me by one hand, and said, quote, come, see if you can feel it. I've only a small tail, end quote.
What?
Then threw himself on top of me and knelt between my legs. I threatened to scream. He said, you can shout here as much as you like. Nobody will hear you. When she refuses to have sex with him and fights him, saying, I'd rather die, he says to her, well, die then. Yeah. Before repeatedly stabbing her in the neck, head, shoulder, and back.
Wow.
Yeah. Come see if you can feel it. I've only a small tail. Now, I have to say, this text was written in German and translated to English.
Yeah.
But if he's between her legs, I can only surmise one thing. So, yeah.
I'm just not, I'm not quite sure I know of any gentleman or guy in the world that would say I have a small tail.
Come look, I have a small penis.
Yeah, exactly. Come on.
Yeah. Next, he accosts another woman at a railway station just the following Saturday. He tries to rape and strangle her, but she defends herself, and he pushes her into the Düssel River. But she does save herself.
Okay.
Then he attacks Sophie Ruck while she's riding her bike. He drags her off the back of the bicycle and hits her in the head. There are too many people around to do anything.
Okay.
August 1929, Peter attacks Frau Mantel. She's accosted. He stabs her in the back. Anna Golding, the same day, close to the same hour, on the same corner of the same street in town. A man named Heinrich Kornblum was accosted and stabbed in the back. So he's just randomly finding people and stabbing them so he can get off.
I mean, he's been out of control, but now he's really out of control.
Now he's really out of control.
Yeah.
And no one's stopping him. So he's just going from place to place to place. And these three people were all stabbed on the same street corner.
Wow.
On the same day.
Amazing.
In September that same year, 1929, Peter attempted to murder 2 more people. And then he decided that a hammer would be a better weapon for him to carry with him. One big blow to the head and his victim would be dead. And it's also said that the newspapers are all a titter over this murder, and Peter needed to switch it up as not to be thought of as the murderer of all of these people or the attacker of all these people. So they've been stabbed. So he's switching to a hammer.
Sure.
He also picked something that he just had at home: scissors, pocket knife, hammer. So he's never seen purchasing any of these things, right?
Right.
On September 30th, 1929, Peter crosses paths with Ida Reuter, a 31-year-old servant at the train station. He convinces her to go for a walk and then struck her in the head with his new hammer. She struggled as he dragged her away from the path. He raped her and then hit her again. He continued to strike her in the head until she was dead, and only then did he reach orgasm. Quote, "One Sunday I left home at 6 o'clock in the evening. I had pocketed my hammer. At the railway station, I saw a young girl, accosted her, and proposed a walk." So accosted means I approached her, okay?
Right. Okay.
"We had a beer at Schumacher's and then walked over the Rhine Bridge to a popular area. During this walk, night had fallen. Ida hesitated to go any further. Therefore, we turned back. Midway between the top of the wood and the playground, having made sure that nobody was around, I pulled the hammer from my hip pocket and hit the girl in the right temple. For that purpose, I had moved to the right side, and without a sound, she collapsed. People were approaching from the woods. I dragged Ida from the dam down to the meadows. Here I waited until the people had passed, and meanwhile, she had regained consciousness, and she said, quote, 'Let me alone,' end quote. Then I dragged her a good deal farther. I gave her another hammer blow on the head and raped her. I pulled off her knickers to wash my hands with them in the Rhine."
Jeez. Wow.
Then he says that he saw a man with a big dog, so he leaves.
Okay.
And I thought, well, you probably got sexual fantasies about the dog, too, about Clifford coming down the street, too.
Exactly.
October 11th, 1929, Peter crosses paths with another servant girl, Elizabeth Dorrier. She's 22 years old. These two meet outside of the theater, and Peter persuaded her to go for a drink with him. They travel to Grafenberg by train, and as they walk along the Klein-Düssel River, he strikes her in the temple with a hammer. He raped her, and then he continued to beat her with the hammer. She was found the next morning still alive, but she died the following day without ever waking up. Quote, "I left on a weekday about 9 o'clock in the evening, putting the hammer in my hip pocket. By the theater, I met a young, slim girl who later told me her name was Dorrier. I asked her to come for a walk. At first, she said she didn't want to. In the end, she went with me to Schumacher's. We went by tram to Grafenberg and walked along the banks of the Düssel. Suddenly, I gave her a violent blow to the right temple. In order to do so, I stepped back, and without a sound, Elizabeth collapsed. I grabbed her wrist and dragged her several meters from the path. Then I used her sexually after having pulled off her knickers from one leg. I didn't give her more heavy blows with a hammer on the head. After the first blow, she didn't say anything more, but only groaned. I took off her cloak and also the hat, which was very bloody, and I hid these things in the bushes." End quote.
Wow.
And later, police will find the sleeves of her coat had been torn out of her cloak, to which Peter is later going to say, quote, "You can see from that how excited I was," end quote.
Jeez.
Yeah, so once he's captured and he's like going through all of these stabbings and beatings, he says, they bring up this girl and they say, the sleeves were torn out of her coat. And he's like, yeah, that just shows you how excited I was.
He was proud.
Very proud.
Jeez.
October 12th, 1929, two more victims, one named Muir and one named Wanders, are both attacked by Peter with his new trusty hammer. They both survived and were unable to give a really good description of Peter. And I thought, yeah, because they've been hit in the head.
He got bashed in the head with a hammer.
Yeah.
I don't think I'd be able to identify anyone either.
Yeah. I mean, how are you alive?
Yeah.
But he attacks them both in the same night. And Wanders, according to Peter, was going to have sex with him. They go into the bushes and he turns her around and then he takes the hammer from his pocket and he hits her in the head. He actually breaks the hammer while doing this.
Wow.
And the head flies off into the bushes. And in this attack, he had no climax because the hammer broke. That's what he said. Well, my hammer broke, so I couldn't reach climax.
It ruined the mood.
Yeah. Quote, "I left Wanders lying where she was and went on. Wanders was repulsive to me, for I knew she was a professional prostitute, and I never approached that kind of girl. After a quarter of an hour, I returned to the place and searched in vain for the hammer," end quote. Didn't give a shit about her.
Yeah, he has his standards.
But he's going back to look because maybe he can put his hammer back together again.
Wow.
November 7th, 1929, Peter finds a little girl, Gertrude Albermann. Now, here's the thing. I think he gets more enjoyment out of the children, out of the kids, because he can kill them quickly and they don't fight like the adults do.
Right.
And he can take them down so much easier than he can the adults.
Right.
He convinces her to follow him into an area of deserted plots. He rapes her, strangles her, and stabs her in the temple with a pair of scissors. And then he stabbed her 34 more times.
Wow.
Peter feels nothing while he's strangling her, so he puts his fingers into the girl's vagina. At that point, his, quote, member relaxed again and I had to stab, end quote.
Wow.
Only then could the ejaculation take place. Quote, I can hear the bleeding even when the stabbing is through the clothing and into the heart, end quote. He lays on this little girl, he's raping her, and in order to get an erection, he stabs her in the throat, he drinks from her neck, and then he blows his own horn.
Wow.
Quote, on the 27th of November, 1929, I set out with a pair of scissors about 5 o'clock at night. I met a little girl. I talked to her and asked her quietly if she would come with me. The child went with me quite willingly and did not cry. I seized the child's throat and strangled it. I stabbed it in the left temple. The child collapsed without a sound. With my left hand, I held fast to her throat, knelt down and stabbed the child's breast with my scissors. With the right hand, I felt the vagina. After having removed the knickers, I cleaned my hands on the wet grass. It was raining. There were no blood stains on me, end quote.
Wow.
Now, between February and May of 1930, there were 10 attacks with a new hammer. All of these people survived. But then on May 14th, Peter happens upon a man and a woman arguing at the train station. Maria Berdlich. She's 20 years old. She's being bothered by a strange man, and they're kind of like fighting. And Peter approaches and says, hey, are you okay? Is this guy bugging you? And Maria nods, and this guy leaves.
Okay.
So out of the frying pan into the fire.
Yeah.
So she had a bad guy and an even worse guy shows up.
Exactly.
Peter invites Maria to his apartment, and Maria knows that Peter wants to have sex, and she tells him, I'm not interested in sex. So after agreeing to take her to a hotel, he then pushes her into the Grafenberg woods, and he grabs her by the throat, and as he rapes her, he tries to strangle her. Maria begins to scream, and Peter just lets her go. She screams, and for some reason, no one knows, including Peter, why he did this. He takes his hands off of her throat and she runs away.
Wow. Maybe he wanted to get caught.
Maybe he did. But Maria did not report the attack to the police because she's wanted for something. She's got a police record. Instead, she wrote a letter to one of her friends and she gives the details of that night. She's very specific about all these details.
Right.
Now, because Maria wrote the wrong address on the envelope, the post office couldn't deliver it. So they open it up. Now, in the United States, that's a felony.
Right. Yeah, you can't do that.
You can't open other people's mail. Maybe the post office can open other people's mail, but they open it up because they're trying to figure out where this letter needs to go, right? They open it up, and when they read the contents of the letter, they forward it to the police.
Good.
And it's usually serial killers get caught by something that has absolutely nothing to do with them actually killing.
Right.
And this is the case here, too. Enter Chief Inspector Gannat. He wants to talk to Maria because he thinks she might be a victim of the Düsseldorf murderer. So he gets her down to the police station for a chat, and while they're talking, Maria tells him that, yeah, I remember where his apartment is.
Oh, wow.
So she takes him and a slew of police officers to 71 Mettmanner Strasse, and Inspector Gannat meets with the landlady who says, the guy you're looking for is Peter Kürten. And Maria actually sees Peter in the stairwell, but she's too terrified to point him out, even though she's flanked by a dozen or so police officers. She doesn't say, there he is.
Right.
She doesn't point him out because she's too terrified.
Right.
And by the time she does open her mouth, Peter has fled. Peter's gone.
Yep.
So while the inspector searches Peter's apartment, Peter sees the inspector standing in the communal hallway, leaves. He finds his wife and tells her that he raped Maria, and then he moves to a new location, a rented room in the Alderstrasse, where he sleeps quietly for 2 days.
Well, of course, he's going to take a nap because he's been hard at work. That's a lot of killing.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
He returns to Augusta on May 23rd, 1930, where he confesses that, yes, he is the Vampire of Düsseldorf. Not only did he attack Maria, he is the Vampire of Düsseldorf. Now, Peter knows he's been had, and even though he's been raping and murdering and running around hitting people in the head with a hammer and stabbing them with scissors and a knife and cheating on his wife.
A wampin and a wampin.
A wampin and a wampin. Coming in, riding into town, a wampin and a wampin. He's still very attached to his wife. So he comes up with a plan to ensure her financial security. After he confesses to all the attacks and the murders, he lets her know there's a large reward for his capture.
Okay.
Quote, she raved that I should take my life, then she would do the same, since her future was completely without hope. End quote.
Okay.
But if she turns him in, it's a different story, right?
Right.
Augusta's looking at Peter going, kill yourself, and then I'm going to kill myself because there's no hope for the lot of us.
Right.
And he says, wait a second, honey. If you turn me in, you can make some money.
Yeah. It's kind of like the Peter lottery.
Isn't it? Yeah. But his name is Peter too, right?
Yeah.
I never even made that connection through all the crying in his pants, through the dropping off the paratroopers, through all of it. I never made that connection.
Yeah.
Peter plans to carry out one more spectacular attack before his capture. But his wife figures this out. She goes immediately to the police. And when he meets her again, it was an arranged meeting between him and his wife. They were supposed to meet outside the St. Ruckus Church at 3 p.m. on May 24th. Police, armed with revolvers, surrounded him. And Peter smiled and offered no resistance, saying, quote, there is no need to be afraid, end quote. So Augusta reluctantly takes the police to her rendezvous point, and they pick him up. And she's going to get the reward. And it's at this point that Peter starts talking. And does he ever talk? He gives astonishing details about all his crimes to a distinguished psychologist and author of the book, The Sadist, Dr. Carl Berg.
Okay.
Peter claimed that he perpetrated 79 individual acts of crime in all and went to great lengths to convince the authorities of his guilt.
Jeez.
And there are those who think he did this so his wife Augusta would get the full benefit of the reward.
Right.
And Peter has a photographic memory. Remember me telling you this?
Yeah.
And while Peter recounts these crimes, he is, quote, greatly pleased, end quote. So he's recounting, he's in his head, he's in his spank bank, and he's recounting this. And I read that the stenographers were less than pleased.
I'll bet. Do we know how much the reward was?
It was $4,000. Yeah.
Which at that time was a lot of money.
It was a whole lot of money.
Yeah.
It was a tremendous amount of money.
Yeah.
But he's recalling these crimes. The stenographers are beside themselves. And I wrote in the margin, does that mean he's recalling his crimes and climaxing in his pants in front of the stenographers?
Yeah. Maybe that's why they weren't so pleased.
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking.
Yeah,
that's all the report said, that the stenographers were less than pleased.
Wow.
But you can be the judge of that one. There was nothing in the book about any of that.
I kind of don't want to think about that.
Well, I've made you think about it for the last 45 minutes.
Yeah,
but
true.
Even though it has long been accepted that there is no single reason for serial crime, the same contributing factors rear their evil head in the case of nearly all killers of this type. Peter Kürten is no different and exhibits many characteristics of a so-called lust killer. He was essentially a pathologically oversexed psychopath, an individual so self-centered that in his eyes no other human being mattered. Peter admitted to a feeling of tension before and after the crime, a condition that convinced the experts of the sexual character of the motive. The attacks were planned and carried out in order to achieve a sexual satisfaction that could only be obtained through acts of violence. This is the ultimate operation of a monstrous and unique egotism, the satisfaction of one's sexual urges at all costs. Yeah.
Wow.
Quote, I committed my acts of arson for the same reason, sadistic propensity. I got pleasure from the glow of the fire and the cries for help,
Wow.
end quote.
It's sad.
According to him, quote, if I don't ill-treat the woman during intercourse, then I get no orgasm. Even with my wife, I had to use a sort of fantasy. Otherwise, I was impotent. It was usually my wife who took the initiative for intercourse. After we had been married 6 months, she used to say, are we married or aren't we?
Wow.
She has always had to help me get an erection, and even then, in order to succeed, I had to conjure up all kinds of fantasies, and then it took a long time. Okay, so it takes him a long time with his wife
Yeah.
and 2 little girls at a fairground back to back.
Jeez.
So too with my victims, I never succeeded without brutalities, not even with Han. She believed that I had complete intercourse with her, but I did not ejaculate. Without violence, my member slackens quickly in the vagina. So the women, even though he raped them, he couldn't actually get it up to rape them. He had to see blood.
He was a slacker. Sorry.
He had to see blood in order to get sexually aroused.
Yeah.
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 Quote, the main thing with me was to see blood. Here I must tell you of another recent case. Whenever I happened to be near a serious accident in the street, I felt sexually excited. A short time before I was arrested, I saw a brakesman fall from the freight wagon of a streetcar and go under its wheels. The blood gushed out and I pretended to assist the victim. Then I had an orgasm.
Oh, man.
Such cases happen frequently, even with animals. Thus, once on a street corner, I saw a horse that had been knocked over by a tram. The animal bled to death. By chance, I saw it all and ejaculated.
Gee whiz.
End quote. And again, who is doing this man's laundry?
Exactly.
Because that is a lot of boot glue.
Yeah.
I mean,
yeah. Wow.
Quote, whether I took a knife or a pair of scissors or a hammer in order to see blood, it was a matter of indifference to me or mere chance. Often, after the hammer blows, the bleeding victims moved and struggled just as they did when they were strangled. I never got an orgasm at the start of these proceedings, and for that reason, I had to continue.
Wow.
End quote. Now, according to Dr. Berg, it is common for sexual sadists to say that they can't reach sexual satisfaction without violence. And Peter started in childhood with attacking animals, then moved to bestiality and found that it was in the killing of the animals and the spilling of blood that he found sexual stimulation. And all of this is happening at the age of puberty. One of the many victims that we didn't even discuss because he lived was a man who was sitting on a park bench. He was drunk, and Peter came up from behind him and hit him with the sharp edge of an axe.
Oh, wow.
And when the man fell over and started bleeding, Peter automatically climaxed. So his crimes are being committed solely in order to satisfy this sexual urge.
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah.
Wow.
Peter will say that he performed these heinous acts because of his childhood and upbringing and the way he was incarcerated and treated in jail.
Wah.
Wah. Peter believed that society owed him something.
Of course he did.
Yeah.
Of course he did.
And according to Dr. Berg, quote, Peter Kürten thought a lot about himself and got to the point of some sort of self-recognition. He calls himself impetus to the point of brutality, speaks often of his inclination to brag, of the megalomania which is inherited in his family. He is aware of his fatal sadistic propensity. All this, he explains, is due to heredity and his horrible youth, end quote.
Yeah, whatever.
And then Peter says, quote, what a man becomes has nothing to do with him. It's just what his parents were. And that applies to me too. Just for the pleasure of being bad, no man becomes a criminal. There's always a certain something which comes into it for which he is not answerable, end quote. So it's basically what we said at the beginning of the podcast. The apple doesn't fall far from the tree. He's saying my dad was bad, so I'm bad.
Yeah.
That's why.
Yeah, that's my excuse.
What a man becomes has nothing to do with him. Yet what everybody becomes has absolutely everything to do with you.
Right. Yeah. Well, once again, on a scale of 1 to 10, he's about a 75 as a narcissist.
I also think it's interesting that in the last months before his trial, Peter occupied himself in prison with the question of his legal responsibility. Was he insane? Could he be kept from a death sentence? Peter Kürten's trial began on April 13th, 1931, on charges including 9 murders and 7 attempted murders. Peter's outward appearance was of a successful businessman in a well-tailored suit. He initially retracted his extensive confession, claiming that he had only sought to ensure his wife's financial security. However, exhaustive questioning by the examining magistrate and a damning litany of evidence over the subsequent 2 months of this trial caused him to eventually say, "Yeah, I did it." In an emotionless voice, Peter claimed that his childhood and the German penal system was responsible for releasing his sadistic tendencies, and he showed no remorse for his crimes.
Of course he didn't.
So 2 months to trial. And this is in 1931. It was usually, wham, bam, thank you, ma'am, put him in jail, do whatever, right?
Yeah. The judicial system was quick and swift.
It was swift justice. But this trial goes on for 2 months, and the jury takes, how long do you think?
An hour.
90 minutes to return a verdict of guilty on all counts.
Dang, I missed it by 30 minutes.
And Peter Kürten received 9 death sentences.
Wow.
Peter did not exercise his right of appeal, but he did petition for a pardon.
Okay, under what?
Well, he petitions to be pardoned, and he thought he was going to be successful because the minister of justice in office at that time didn't believe in capital punishment.
Okay.
So towards the end of June 1931, Peter was full of hope for this pardon, and he expressed his joy in letters from his wife over the fact that 4,000 marks, that's what it was, 4,000 marks of the reward offered for him had been paid to her. And in the last month, he assured Dr. Berg that the waking fantasies and the sadistic imagery of his former times had entirely vanished. He claimed he was transformed into an entirely new being. And the angels wept.
God. Nice try, dude.
Yeah, I'm over it.
Yeah.
I'm not going to do that anymore. I'm a new man. I'm an entirely new being.
I've seen the errors of my way.
Yeah. On the 1st of July, he received the news that his request for pardon was denied. His last wish was permission to write farewell letters. And in 13 letters, which he wrote to the relatives of his victims, he asked for forgiveness and for their prayers as he himself would pray for them in heaven. I got news for you, Peter. I think you're going someplace a little warmer.
Yeah, you're going south, bud.
Don't think you're heading to the pearly gate.
And it ain't St. Pete.
No. Now, he gets this death sentence. How do you think they're planning on killing him? This is 1931.
Well, it's either hanging or the firing squad.
Guillotine.
Oh, wow.
Guillotine.
Daggone.
Yes.
That's harsh.
Guillotine.
Wow.
And for his last meal, Peter Kürten ate Wiener Schnitzel, fried potatoes, and white wine. And while eating, Peter asked Dr. Berg, quote, "Tell me, after my head is chopped off, will I still be able to hear, at least for a moment, the sound of my own blood gushing from the stump of my neck? That would be the pleasure to end all pleasures."
Wow.
End quote.
Wow.
And Dr. Berg told him, I don't have his actual quote in my notes, but Dr. Berg told him, yeah, for a minute.
Yeah.
For a second, maybe.
Jeez.
Quietly and composed, he went to the chopping block in Cologne, Germany on the 2nd of July, 1931. His head was chopped off, and then he was chopped off by the guillotine operator, who is also known as the printer's cutter. I thought that was pretty interesting.
The printer's cutter.
The printer's cutter.
Okay. Okay.
After his head is severed from his neck, his head is then cut symmetrically right down the middle. His nose and eyes on either side.
Wow.
His brain is taken out because they want to study it, and they found no physical abnormalities. The rest of his mummified head is on display at Ripley's Believe It or Not
Really?
in Wisconsin.
Oh, Wisconsin.
In the Wisconsin Dells.
Oh, my God.
That's where it is. I've seen a picture. I will post a picture. There's actually a video. It's like, going around in a circle so you can get a full 360 of this thing. I will post that. I will
That's
post
cool.
that in the In-Laws and Outlaws.
Jeez. This story just gets weirder and weirder.
Yeah. I'm going to leave you with one last quote of Peter. Quote, "As I see the crimes committed by me, they are so ghastly that I do not want to attempt any sort of excuse for them. I am prepared to bear the consequences of my misdeeds and hope that thus I will atone for a large part of what I have done. And when you consider my execution and recognize my goodwill to atone for my crimes, I should think that the terrible desire for revenge and hatred against me cannot endure. And I want to ask you to forgive me." End quote.
That's not going to happen.
A little too late.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Wow.
Are you sad that you did it? Or are you sad you got caught? Because I feel like he'd still be out there, burning and stabbing and everything else.
Absolutely.
Now, a little bit of trivia. Peter Kürten is the subject of Randy Newman's song In Germany Before the War from the album Little Criminals.
Oh, really?
And a number of novels have made substantial mention of Peter. In the 1975 novel Salem's Lot by Stephen King, Kürten's history is summarized by Matt Burke as part of his research into factual vampirism, though Peter is referred to as Kürten throughout. In Chapter 4 of D.M. Thomas's The White Hotel from 1981, the main protagonist, Frau Lisa Erdmann, is haunted by Peter Kürten's story, which she experiences as a, quote, compulsive daylight nightmare. And in the novel Swimsuit, which was published in 2009 by James Patterson, the character of Henri Benoit, a serial killer himself, makes a reference to Peter Kürten while recounting his own crimes for an autobiography.
Wow.
In the Ariana Franklin novel, The City of Shadows, one of the main characters is a police inspector who helped to catch Peter Kürten. And the movie Copycat from 1995, serial killer Daryl Lee Cullum states that Peter Kürten is the serial killer the police are looking for in current-day San Francisco. So people love in literature and movies, they love to throw his name around because he's such a heinous character.
Yeah, I mean, that's the worst case I've heard.
Yeah, the worst.
Yep.
And that is the story of Peter Kürten, the Vampire of Düsseldorf. Hope you can sleep tonight. But that's all I have to say about that. Hey, Hitched to Homicide listeners. This is Chris Calvert. I love doing research and writing about real crimes, but I also love writing about fictional people who commit horrible atrocities. When you're ready to take a break from true crime for fictional crime, go to chriscalvert.com, where you'll find all my books, including some free ones to get you started. Jane Doe is one badass chick who quietly hunts terrorists in the United States. The Sex and Lies books are all FBI and CIA cases with a little romance on the side. And coming summer 2022, Book 10 in the series, Sex, Lies, and Rock and Roll, releases. You can find all of these books everywhere, and if you like to listen instead of read, you can find them all on Audible. So go grab a free book or take a listen. I love all the characters I've written. I've given them pain, ruined their lives, make them suffer, and maybe even throw in a heroic death. Or maybe they live to fight another day. Check it all out at chriscalvert.com, and thanks for being a listener of Hitched to Homicide.
Well, it looks like Peter... I can't even say it. I'm not going to say it.
I almost saved this one for Halloween. I almost saved it for Halloween. But then I was like, no. I was in so deep, like reading all of this stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, this is just
I was like, I'm moving forward. I'm moving on.
Too terrifying for Halloween, believe it or not.
It's bad.
Well,
I'll come up with another good one for Halloween.
Let's forget about all that. Let's do a little Bless Your Heart.
Let's do it.
Well, bless your heart.
So I really like this one. This is dumb criminals. I mean, what can you say? Here you go.
Okay, I'm waiting.
2 men arrested after vehicle search finds drugs in bags marked, quote,
Drugs.
Bag full of drugs. 2 men were arrested.
It didn't say cocaine, weed, uppers, downers,
no, just,
and Sharpie on the front of the Ziploc.
Just bag full of drugs.
Okay.
Yep.
I was just wondering how OCD they were.
No. 2 men were arrested in Santa Rosa County, Florida, Saturday after law enforcement officers said they found illegal drugs in a bag labeled "bag full of drugs."
It was actually labeled bag full of drugs.
Yeah, that's it. That's it. The men were pulled over by a state trooper for allegedly speeding 25 miles over the limit.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Santa Rosa, which is the county sheriff's office, canine deputies recently assisted FHP, Florida Highway Patrol, on a traffic stop on I-10 where a large amount of narcotics were discovered.
They called in the drug dogs.
Yep.
Okay.
And note to self, this is the best. Do not traffic your illegal narcotics in bags labeled "bag full of drugs." Yeah.
Word to the wise.
Yeah. Our canines can read, a Facebook post from the Santa Rosa County Sheriff's Office said. I thought that was great.
Our dogs are smarter than you are.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The narcotics and other contraband found reportedly included 75 grams of methamphetamine, 1.36 kilograms of GHB, which I'm not really sure what that is, 1 gram of cocaine, 3.6 grams of fentanyl, 15 MDMA tablets, which I think is like
That's ecstasy.
Yeah, and drug prescriptions.
Not that I've ever done it before. I haven't.
Yep. And
Rob's never done anything. That's why he doesn't know what any of these are.
Yeah, believe it, I'm a musician. I've never done a drug in my life. So,
honey, I'm your drug.
Yeah, you are my drug. So there you go. Don't mark your drugs on the bag, a bag full of drugs.
That just makes me think of all the TikTok videos of the people who are super organized.
Yeah, exactly.
I watch those and I'm like, oh my God. And their nails are perfect and they're like clicking against the plastic as they're like labeling everything in the refrigerator. And I'm like, some mornings I can't even find the butter.
Yeah, exactly.
So I'm a creative mind. We don't label.
Yeah.
We don't label things.
I just feel good when I find my car keys.
We have piles and we're too creative. So most of the time we're just walking in circles.
Exactly.
Well, if you have a good bless your heart, you can send it to Chris@hitchedhomicide.com. I don't read them. I just pass them along. Or you can go to the website and use the pull down menu where you can also suggest a case and give us a bless your heart. And you can also join the In-Laws and Outlaws from the website.
Yeah, please join. We have a lot of fun there.
Hitchedhomicide.com. We're getting lots of people from not to just give one provider a shout out, but we're picking up tons of people from Spotify. So shout out to all you Spotify listeners. We appreciate you.
Awesome.
Well, that's all we have this week, and I'd just like to say I really feel like it's enough.
Yeah, I think
we've had enough.
I'm going to go take a shower.
We've had enough for today.
Yep.
Yes, we have. Well, that's the peanut butter to my jelly sitting over there.
And you're the bun to my hot dog.
Yes, I
am. No pun intended.
Join us next time on Hitched to Homicide.
Bye, y'all.
You're so bad. But very appropriate.
Thank you.